Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be going through my 2022 fiction favorites. So before we get into the list, I have 6 honorable mentions and then I have my top 10. So the first honorable mention is Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is part of the Brown Sisters trilogy, which is a series of 3 companion novels that each follow a sister of the Brown family. And I loved the representation in the first one, but all of them have great representation, and the second book, I just liked the love story the most. It is fake dating, workplace romance, and I really liked the storyline of the male main character outside of the romance. The second and third book kind of go together, and that is Always Only You and With You Forever by Chloe Liese. These are both part of the Bergman Brothers series, and it's called the Bergman Brothers series for the alliteration, but it actually is 5 brothers and 2 sisters. Both of these books follow brothers. So the second one follows the brother who plays hockey, and he is the sunshine to a grumpy woman. And so they have the grumpy sunshine trope and the sports romance, and then the female main character also has autism and bonds with the youngest sister in the Bergman family who also has autism, and their bonding and their story, and this is really cute and the main reason that I loved this one so much. And then I also really loved the autism representation in With You Forever, which is the 4th book, and this is a marriage of convenience between one of the Bergman brothers and his love interest, and he has to get married in order to receive his inheritance. So this person who actually had a crush on him already agrees to marry him for a period of time so that he can receive his inheritance. Overall, this whole series is very, very cute. Overall, this whole series is very, very cute, has great representation. The first brother in the first book is hard of hearing. The female main character in the 4th book has irritable bowel disease. There's all sorts of representation, and then also the autism representation is own voices because the author Chloe Liese also has autism, so that is super great. And then the 4th book I have is also a romance, and that is If the Boot Fits by Rebekah Weatherspoon. This follows a wealthy family of brothers. There are 3 books. This is the second one, and this was my favorite because I really love something that happens towards the end of the book. I won't get into any spoilers, but that is why I chose this one. And this is the love story between a personal assistant and the brother who's a movie star. All of these books are really well written and really interesting, and I really liked this series overall as well. And so those are my 4 romances that I have for honorable mentions. I will mention that all 4 of these romances have spice in them. So I'm not super familiar with romances. I haven't read a ton of them, but I would say these are relatively high on the spice level, so make sure you're comfortable with that if you get into reading them. And then the 5th book I have on my list is Anxious People by Fredrik Backman, which is translated by Neil Smith. And this book follows a hostage situation taking place in an apartment viewing after a bank robbery fails. And it is very interesting because it is told after the fact when the police are interviewing all of the people that were present. And it is not entirely clear who the bank robber actually is from the perspective of the reader, so it is also a mystery. But mainly it is a look at all of the different people's lives and the way that they interact with one another and the way that they interact with their loved ones. And I just thought it was a really interesting look at humanity. The 6th and final honorable mention on my list is Motherbridge of Love, which is actually a picture book illustrated by Joseph Massey, and it goes through the love that a child of adoption experiences in terms of having the love of both their birth mother and also their adoptive mother, and it's just this really cute poem picture book that is a super quick read. Now to get into the top 10, these are technically ordered, but it's not a very strong ordering. The 10th book on this list is The Paris Secret by Natasha Lester. This is a book that follows 3 timelines. It is historical fiction, so the first timeline is England in 1939 and follows the Penrose sisters, Skye and Liberty, one of which is a pilot, which is extremely unusual at this time for a woman in the war. and she reunites with her soulmate from childhood, Nicholas, who is now engaged to a French woman named Margot Jourdan, and so it follows all three of them and their story throughout the wartime. And then the second timeline is Paris in 1947, where Christian Dior is unveiling his collection of gowns dedicated to his sister Catherine, who forged a friendship with Skye and Margot during the war. And then the third one is present day, where a fashion conservator named Kat Jourdan is discovering a priceless gown collection of Dior gowns in her grandmother's cottage. And she's trying to figure out the story of where these gowns came from and what is the story behind them and how did they come to be in her grandmother's possession and why haven't she heard about them up until now. Obviously she's a gown conservator, so she's very interested in them. This book is really, really good for people who like historical fiction, especially World War II historical fiction. Specifically, if you really liked The Nightingale, which I loved The Nightingale, you would really like this book. The ninth book I have on my list is a very popular one, and that is Heartstopper Volume 4 by Alice Oseman. I loved the whole Heartstopper series. It's a great graphic novel series. I highly recommend reading the whole thing, but I included Volume 4 because I read that in January when it came out this year. And this follows a bunch of high school students through their journey. It focuses on two main boys, but it also follows their friends and their families. And it's a journey of discovery as well as mental health. And I loved the representation in this story. And I think of the volumes, Volume 4 is probably my favorite so far. Number 8 on my list is Inside Out and Back Again by Thanhha. And this is about a young girl, H, who grew up in Saigon and ends up having to flee due to war and moves to Alabama in the United States. And it talks about her journey before leaving Vietnam and during the time that she is a refugee in America. The 7th book on my list is Convenience Store Woman, which is by Sayaka Murata and is translated by Ginny Taple Takamori. And this is a very short, very interesting book about a young woman who doesn't really fit in and ends up finding her place as a convenience store worker. And at first, her family is really happy that she has a job while she's supporting herself going through college. And then after finishing college, she decides to stay on, and it's been 18 years, and she still loves the structure and the time that she spends at the grocery store. And it is really interesting to hear her perspective and what she loves about it and why she is there, and then follow her journey as she is exploring other avenues. The 6th book on my list is Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. This is a YA fantasy. This is a retelling of a story in which the stepmother turns these 6 brothers into birds and causes the sister not to be able to speak, or one of the brothers will die. And Shiori, the princess in this story, has to use her magic and her wit and her skills to overcome all of the adversity that happens to her during the story. The 5th book on my list is Beneath a Scarlet Sky by Mark Sullivan, and this is another World War II historical fiction that follows a character known as Pinolela, and this is actually based on a true story and talks about his journey living in Milan and then elsewhere in Italy at the time of the German occupation. The back of the book gives a lot more details about what the story is about, but personally I think it spoils some of the story to know all of those details going in, so I would recommend not reading the description and just jumping right in if you like World War II historical fiction and are at all interested in reading this one. The 4th one I have is also historical fiction. I guess I really liked my historical fiction this year, and that is The Henna Artist by Alka Joshi. And this book is about Lakshmi, who is a woman who escaped her arranged marriage in India and ends up pretending that she's married while living in Jaipur. And in Jaipur, she works as a henna artist, which is how she's able to survive not being a married woman. But all of the wealthy women that she works for wouldn't hire her at all if they knew that she was unmarried. And the book follows her journey as a henna artist in Jaipur. The third book I have on my list is Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley, and this is a YA kind of cross of genres. So it is contemporary, mystery, thriller, and this thriller follows Donis Fontaine, who is kind of caught between her hometown and the Ojibwe reservation that is nearby, and she ends up, I don't know how much detail I want to give. There's a lot of detail in the description, but I feel like it gives away a lot of things that happen in the story, whereas I just went in knowing that it was a thriller about a Ojibwe young person, and she gets wrapped up in a mystery and ends up working to solve it. The second book on my list is The Finders, a Mystery by Jeffrey B. Burton. This was a really pleasant surprise, not a book that I was expecting to love, but I ended up really enjoying it. And this is about Mason, or Mace Reed, who lives in Chicago and specializes in training dogs for human remains detection. And it specifically follows him and his golden retriever puppy Vera as they investigate the case of a serial killer. And then this is also part of a mystery series, so there are 2 more books after this, and I have yet to read them, but I am hoping to read them in the coming year. Finally, at number 1, I have Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a book in verse, and the narration for this is phenomenal. I highly recommend the audiobook. It is essentially like listening to slam poetry. If you've ever heard slam poetry, I love slam poetry, and it was basically a whole book of that. Really enjoyed it. Elizabeth Acevedo is a super amazing narrator, and I can't wait to read more by her. This book specifically is about 2 sisters, Camino Rios and Yahaira Rios. Camino Rios lives in the Dominican Republic, and Yahaira Rios lives in New York City, and they didn't know about each other until their father passes away at the beginning of the book, and their worlds end up clashing together, and they end up discovering about each other, and it is a super moving, really compelling story, and written in verse, so it is super lyrical and really interesting. And that is my favorite fiction book of the year, and in fact those are my top 10 favorite fiction books of the year, top 15, 16. And I hope you found some suggestions. I would love to hear what your favorite fiction books of the year were, so I can pick up some of your favorites. Please leave them in the comments down below. Thank you so very much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye!